In this video, we'll be talking about how to apply graph transformations onto a function. We'll learn how to modify the formula of a function based off of some desired graph transformations. Before we look at some examples, let's do a quick overview of the transformations we've learned in the previous videos. First of all, if we add or subtract by a number, what we're doing is we're shifting our graph in some direction. If we multiply by a number, we're scaling and or reflecting our graph. Now, if we take our function and we add c to it, we're going to be shifting our graph up c units. If we take our function and we subtract c from it, we're shifting our graph down c units. Next, in our function, if we replace our input x with x plus c, we're shifting our graph to the left c units. And if we replace our input with x minus c, we're shifting our graph right c units. When we multiply a function by c, we're doing a vertical scale by a factor of c. But if we take our function and we replace the input x with c times x, we're doing a horizontal scale, this time by a factor of 1 over c. Remember, there's this reciprocal effect. If we look at negative of our function, we're doing a vertical reflection. And lastly, if we replace the input of our function with negative x, we are doing a horizontal reflection. Now let's get some practice with modifying our functions. So for our example here, we want to write the equation for the graph with the given transformations applied to the given basic function. In part A here, the basic function that we're given is f of x equals x cubed. And the transformations that we want to apply are shift to the right 1 unit, vertical reflection, and then shift up 3 units. When there are multiple transformations we want to apply, we just apply them one at a time. Now, our first transformation is to shift right 1 unit. If we want to shift right 1 unit, we're looking at f of x minus c, meaning we want to take our input x and replace it with x minus however many units we want to shift by. So since we want to shift by 1 unit, our equation will now be y equals, instead of x cubed, it would be x minus 1 cubed. Our next graph transformation is a vertical reflection. To do a vertical reflection, we look at negative of our function. So we'll take the formula that we have right now and just multiply it by -1. So our equation now becomes y equals negative of x minus 1 cubed. Our last graph transformation is to shift up 3 units. If we want to shift up 3 units, we take our existing formula and we add 3 to it. So our equation then becomes y equals negative of x minus 1 cubed plus 3. So this equation, y equals negative x minus 1 cubed plus 3, has all 3 of the graph transformations applied onto the x cubed function. Let's do a couple more examples. In example B here, our basic function is f of x equals 1 over x, the reciprocal function. The graph transformations that we want to apply are shift left 2 units, horizontal scale by a factor of 4, and then shift up 1 unit. So we just need to apply these transformations one at a time. Our first transformation, shift left 2 units. If we want to shift to the left 2 units, we want to replace our input x with x plus c. In this case, our c is going to be 2. So our function is going to be y equals, and what I want to do is replace the x in the formula with x plus 2. So we have y equals 1 over x plus 2. Our next transformation is a horizontal scale by a factor of 4. From what we learned previously, if we replace our input x with c times x, this gives us a horizontal scale by the reciprocal. So if we replace the input here with 4 times x, then that would be a horizontal scale by a factor of 1/4. But that's not what we want. We want a horizontal scale by a factor of 4. So instead, what we need to do is replace our input x with 1/4 times x. That way, we do a horizontal scale by the reciprocal of 1/4, which would be 4. So we want to take our existing equation here, and this time replace the x with 1/4 times x. So our equation is y equals 1 over 1/4 times x plus 2. Now, our last transformation is to shift up 1 unit. If we want to shift up 1 unit, we just take our formula and we add 1 at the end. So our equation now becomes y equals 1 over 1/4 times x plus 2, and then add 1 at the end. So this is the equation for the graph of the 1 over x formula with our 3 transformations applied. Let's take a look at one last example. In example C here, we're working with the basic function f of x equals square root of x. And the transformations that we want to apply are, first, shift to the right 5 units, then do a horizontal reflection, then we want to do a vertical scale by a factor of 3, and then lastly, shift down 8 units. Let's apply these transformations one at a time to see how our formula changes at each step. Our first transformation is a shift to the right 5 units. If we want to shift to the right, we want to replace our input with x minus 5. So in our function, replacing the input x with x minus 5, our equation becomes y equals square root of x minus 5. Next, if we want to do a horizontal reflection, we need to replace our input x with negative x. So in our existing formula here, replace this x here with negative x, and this gives us y equals square root of negative x minus 5. Our next transformation is a vertical scale by a factor of 3. If we want to do a vertical scale by a factor of c, all we have to do is take our formula and multiply by c. So in this case, take our existing formula here, multiply it by 3. So our equation now becomes y equals 3 times square root of negative x minus 5. And then our last transformation is to shift down 8 units. If we want to shift down any number of units, we take our formula and we subtract that number. So take our formula here and subtract 8 to shift it down 8 units. So our final equation is y equals 3 times square root of negative x minus 5, and then subtract 8 at the end. So this is our square root function with our 4 graph transformations applied. So in this video, we learned how to modify the formula of a function to get the desired graph transformations. In our next video, we'll learn how to identify the graph transformations of a function by looking at the formula. And we'll also get some practice with graphing.